Welcome to episode 5 of Thought Mining with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Nathan Anderson. I am Derek Olson. Welcome. And last episode, we were talking about some things that revolved around the concept of fear and the fear that we feel putting ourselves out there in certain situations. And we've got some even more nuanced ways to think about and talk about those kinds of fears in episode 5. So welcome, Nathan.
Yeah, welcome, Derek. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yep. Well, thank you for doing this podcast with me.
Yeah, likewise. It's a great pleasure.
Cool. So you had recently an experience in your workplace that I think a lot of us can identify with. And it has to do with group dynamics. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Sure. After our last episode, we were talking about, what are we going to talk about next? And we weren't too terribly sure that the concept of fear seemed like something that we could build on. And we're like, where should we go with this, though? I mean, as I look back on my life, I feel like many of my decisions have been fear-based, whether it's like fear if I don't do this, then these might be the consequences, and fear if I do this, then these might be the consequences. And but yeah, to kind of reel us back into where you were going with your question, I said something like, I just jotted down kind of a lengthy email about fears that I had recently experienced in work. And so, I think we were going to wrestle with that a little bit today. I'm in a lot of meetings at work and on a lot of different committees. And I recently had this experience where one of my colleagues had made a comment about, in an email saying something like, you should say more stuff or something like that, just kind of lighthearted. And I was like, I think sometimes I do hesitate to speak up in meetings. I don't think he was asking for any sort of detailed explanation, but every once in a while, my mind sort of just works like this. I think it's almost in a way of a thought mining practice where, you have so much stuff coming across your mind, and then some small sentence or phrase sort of really connects with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you sort of wrestle with that, kind of contemplate it further. I feel like now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking that was probably just a thought mining exercise I went through. But so thinking about being in a meeting, maybe 15 people or so are around talking about some pretty important stuff, and you periodically have things that come across your mind.
15 people is a lot too, because I mean, I could hesitate to talk in a meeting with 6 people.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And 15 people, I'm almost for sure not going to say anything unless, there was a pre-planned thing where I'm coming in to say something. So I'm like, Derek, you going to tell the people about this or whatever? I'll be like, oh, yeah, fine.
Mm-hmm.
But just in general, if I'm sitting in a meeting with 15 people that, I'm not maybe a primary player in,
mm-hmm.
I'm just there to observe. I'm a casual observer. That's just too big of a group, Yeah. I mean, unless me being there is part of the meeting, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think my role, in these meetings, I am, a pretty active part in the meeting. But there are still certain things certain reasons why I hold back. And this is just one example of times I've felt fears like the ones that I'm going to share here. I mean, I feel like I feel them. Oftentimes, I just hadn't really thought about them in great depth before.
Right. Well, I think it also takes a lot of self-awareness to really explore these things, because I think it's very easy for us to ignore or write off fear as something else, or to find another way to frame it so it's not fear. It's like, well, I didn't talk because, I know that I didn't have anything good to say.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you sort of find an explanation that suits the behavior that's already happened. You didn't say anything in the meeting. Why didn't you say anything? Well, let me find an explanation for that. And you can always kind of retroactively defend your actions no matter what. You know what I mean? So, it's easy to disregard, let's say, personal responsibility, right? So I think what you're doing when you start to really dig into and try to deconstruct what your fears are in these situations, that you are taking responsibility for it. And that's, you know what I mean? You're like saying, hey, you know, I'm not always, you know, the hero of every story or a Captain America to every, you know, person or whatever. And there are things that I can look at where it's like, you know what, I could have did better. I think something was playing on my emotions there, and like why was that happening, and to deconstruct that, it takes, not everybody's even probably capable of doing that, you know, especially if not like forced to do it. So anyway,
right.
kudos on that regard, you know what I mean?
Thanks.
It's like very self-aware and a very self-aware exercise, you know. I think a lot of people would struggle to do, or they wouldn't be able to define 5-6 fears or whatever, you know.
You know, like one of the ways that I've been able to do that, I think, is you mentioned being able to frame your fears, or you've sort of framed them from a point of view. I used a framework and helped me sort of explain this in you know, comprehensible terms if I'm sort of going like a little too complex with it. But some friends and I have been working on this framework called CP2R, and it's about being fit for a particular role that you're in. You know, and in this case, I was a meeting participant. That was my role, I suppose. The framework itself, CP2R, it has 4 domains: capacity, passion, relevance, and presence. And the idea is that if you are in a certain role, you know, in my case, a meeting participant, in our case here, podcaster, the idea is that if you have the capacity to do it, you know, intellectually, emotionally, socially, physically, if you're passionate about it, so you like it, find importance in it, put time into it, put energy into it. If it's relevant, so if what you're doing in that role matters to you or has a positive impact on you and has a positive impact on others, and you're able to stay present in that role, just fully immersed in the tasks that you're engaging in when you're in that role, then you're fit for that role, essentially. So I thought of my role as a meeting participant and thinking through the lens of the CP2R framework as what might have been missing. You know, like, was it my emotional, social, physical, intellectual capacity? Was it my presence? Was it my contributions? Were they relevant? You know, what's kind of holding me back? So I identified 6 that I can read through. But
all right, these are going to be juicy. I'm really looking forward to digging into this part. I love this kind of stuff. How
about the framework thing though? How does that?
Well, I mean, what I envisioned was sort of like a Venn diagram, which is, you know, when I know you know, but it's like when there's circles, and then the circles kind of overlap in the middle, and then it's like it's this, but both here, and so the sort of, and you've probably already Venn diagrammed this already, or maybe I even saw it, but essentially, you know, there's these 4 bubbles, and they're kind of meeting in the center, and if you can kind of like, if you feel that you've identified that you're in the center, you know, you've got the capacity, you've got the you have to help me out a little
passion.
Passion.
It's relevant.
It's relevant to you.
You're able to be present.
And you're able to be present, right? So these 4 things, if you're hitting all of those things, well, I could see like a way that, for instance, if you can step outside of yourself for a second and just verify these things and be like, you know what, that is me. Like, I could see that as being something that you could build a little bit of confidence on, a little bit of a foundation for confidence. Be like, you know what, maybe I've got these creeping insecurities or whatever they're jumping in that, you know what I mean, human nature. But look, I'm aligned to this thing. So you know what, I need to stop overthinking and just do the thing, because I know that I'm aligned for it, you know, and just having like a certain, just, you know, having that extra bit of you know, framework.
Yeah, like a point of reference or something.
Point of reference, yep. Can then, that way you can use that as evidence, you know, especially if you're like sort of an evidence-based thinker. Like, I've got evidence that I'm good for this, so you know what, let's just go for it. And a lot of times, like, you know, if like say I see you and I'm like, hey, you fit all these competencies. You should be speaking up more. You should be leading the meeting because I know, maybe it's easy for me to see that in you, but it's hard for us to see it in ourselves,
Right.
For whatever reason. It's hard for me to look in the mirror and say, you're competent. You know what I mean? It's like, it's hard to do that, for probably most people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. Using it, I don't want to get too deep into the framework itself because I feel like we could probably discuss that in like much greater detail in another episode.
That's a
or
whole
something.
episode.
But this is like probably the seed of it.
Right.
But it does kind of create a common language, I guess, that you can use. So like if you see something in me and you're like, Nathan, you have the intellectual capacity to talk about this, or like what you're saying is relevant, or you can socially communicate this in a way that will help to cultivate healthy relationships with other people in the room or something like that. That helps. If I'm seeing things through that lens as well, then I can sort of make greater meaning out of the feedback that you're providing.
Right.
Should I go into a few of these
Yes, please.
things? So, okay. So
I've been in a lot of meetings too, and I guarantee I probably am gonna identify with every single one of these ones. But sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, it's all good. So the first one, I guess I'm gonna just give like an overview of the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6, and then I can go back and read through them sort of one by one.
Perfect.
But I felt like I fear sometimes in meetings that I lack the social capacity. Sometimes I fear I lack the intellectual capacity. Sometimes I fear I lack the emotional capacity. Sometimes I fear that I might be like too passionate when I'm exhibiting, like when I'm explaining something, I might be too passionate. Sometimes I feel like I lack presence. Sometimes I feel like what I'm saying is not relevant to the context of what the discussion is. So I can elaborate on those a bit. I'll start with social capacity.
Okay.
So, in some cases, I fear that I lack the social capacity to deliver the right words in the right way to accurately articulate what I want to say. It actually kind of rhymed.
Yeah.
So this wasn't meant to be a poem, but it was kind of fun. Even if I do deliver the right words in a way that seems right from my perspective, I fear that the recipient of my message may misinterpret the meaning or intention of what I'm trying to convey.
Right. And so I would say is that, not to get into psychoanalysis, but I think everybody's experienced a version of that where, your intent especially is interpreted by the listener as different than what you're feeling in your heart, right? So someone might say, well, you're just saying that because you want your department to get extra money, or you're just saying that because you think this or that, you know what I mean? And then you have to sort of like fend off those imagined, sparring matches already, and that can overcomplicate. And then you might think, well, this isn't really worth the trouble of speaking up now because, it could just throw the whole monkey wrench into the works and the whole meeting just doesn't work. You know what I mean? Basically, the fear of collapsing the meaning of the meeting itself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I've experienced those outcomes multiple times.
Right.
And
me too.
where I'm, I feel like I'm aware of this stuff. And I feel like every time I get a chance to speak up or try to say what I'm wanting to say is an opportunity to practice. So I feel like it's, I should act on those opportunities when they arise. But, like when I, in terms of being able to articulate the right message using the right words, I sometimes will present as a part of my job. And in previous roles, I presented quite a bit. And I had co-presenters oftentimes, and I really found the value in that because I would be saying things in more of a technically oriented type of way that gets sort of the details of a point across, but it wasn't really speaking in the language that the audience was accustomed to. And so my co-presenters, no matter really who it was, but it was somebody who was more of a practitioner in that type of a field, would say something like, well, what Nathan's really trying to say is, and then they'd be like, oh, now I get it. So that's an example of how.
Can I give an example? I hate to, but now I'm watching this movie in my head of this example. So if I don't say it, I'll be not present. So I get it off my chest or whatever. So a time that I, in a meeting, said something that I felt like was wildly misinterpreted and then worked against me.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to work at a newspaper called the OC Weekly in Orange County, and we used to have these tortured weekly meetings on Wednesdays or whatever. And when I was pretty new, I said in the meeting, and because people had prepared me, they're like, on election night and things like that, we stayed here till midnight, 1, 2, we make sure it gets done. And so I'm anticipating this sort of like, because I used to work like 60 hours a week, and I was like a dogged like journalist, and in my mind I was like, oh, this is the kind of place where you might end up working till midnight, just to make sure you get it done, and like trying to take it serious, and like my perspective on this next thing I'm about to say was like from a hard-working perspective, right? Like you're working so hard, you're going way beyond the 40 hours that you're being paid for, which I always did. And now as I'm older, I'm just like, why did I do that? But I was trying to make my mark, right? Mm-hmm. But what I said was, and I'll explain how it was misinterpreted, and then just made me that guy forever, right? So like, I was like, well, is there like a couch or anything in this newsroom where like if I need to take a nap, I can lay down and take a nap? But in my mind, I'm like, it's 1 a.m. and I got to get this deadline thing at 3, and I'm waiting for, you know what I mean? Like that's what
60 hours in already.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the movie playing in my mind. But then like my editor just like reacted to it like, what? Sleeping at work? And I felt like it was like one of those things like, oh, kids these days, because I was in my mid-20s or something at the time, and it was just like used like as if I was just some lazy jerk who wants to take a nap at 3 in the afternoon on a work day. And that wasn't at all what I had in my mind. But I could see how maybe like I didn't like articulate what exactly I was saying, but like I thought we were all on the same page. We're all journalists, we're all this, we're all that. Nope. Now, from that moment forward, it was like I think there was like a perception that I was like, not
lazy
a hard worker or something.
Yeah.
And I don't think I ever displayed that my entire time working there.
It's a great example. I mean, like having that, and if you encounter something like that at one time, then maybe if you want to speak up again in the future,
right.
You might be a little bit hesitant because what you say or what you're intending to say is misunderstood.
Right. Well, I would say that anytime I'm ever in a meeting, whatever I'm about to say, I always run it through that filter now. You know what I mean? The filter of like, could someone think this means the opposite of what you think it does? You know what I mean? And then also you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube after you've already put it on you know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah.
There's an example.
It's a great example. Thanks so much for sharing that. So the two components of that I saw with or when I was reflecting on that were like I'm saying I might not say the right words. I might be getting the message across incorrectly, but even if I say the right words, I might be even if I say what I perceive to be the right words, I may be misunderstood. And it sounds like you clearly experienced at least like one component of that. Maybe.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm sure I could find more and more examples if I started digging, but that one really jumped. I mean, I haven't thought about that story in years, but like that was definitely like, I could tell after that meeting, because it wasn't just the one guy. It was like everybody in the room, like, and one or two people there I ended up getting to know better, and obviously that perception is not what it is and whatever, but I set myself up for that one, and it was early on when the first like month or something working there, and it just, I don't know, like it seemed as if that was a perception that followed me in that until I was gone, you know what I mean? So it's like, You literally just say one thing once, and then you're just wearing that for the rest
Yeah,
of your
right,
life
right.
until you're somewhere else.
Yeah. Dang.
But I mean, I also have like an easygoing way of just comporting myself, you know, and I think that can be used by certain people to like, well, that's evidence that, you know, he's clearly not a hard worker. But it's like, yeah, whatever. It's just like how I present in the world. It has nothing to do with what I do when I get home. Do I do more work when I get home? Yeah, I do. You know?
Yeah.
Do I get to work on time? I do.
Yeah.
You know?
I know firsthand that you're a super hard worker, and
thanks, man.
I appreciate the hard work that you put into whatever it is that you're doing, but I also appreciate how you're able to carry yourself with such this calming, positive, pleasant energy.
So thanks. I appreciate that.
You know, it's a really nice balance.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to hear the other one?
Yes,
the next
please.
one?
Yep.
Okay, so this one is related to the intellectual capacity component. So first one was social capacity. So sometimes I fear that I lack the intellectual capacity to knowledge of the topic at a level that is suitable for making a meaningful contribution to the discussion. If I don't know enough about the topic or the context surrounding the topic, I may not make worthwhile contributions to the conversation.
Yeah, I've got a traumatic moment around this one too.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Do it. No, like I'm.
Do you have one that you want to share? Like any specific
No, I want to hear you.
examples?
I want to hear yours.
Oh, okay. This one, I was on a movie set, and I was very new to being on a production crew, and there was the first AD was there, and he was like this real. Like sometimes people have a real authoritarian attitude when they get into a position like first AD, which is first assistant director, because their whole job is like keeping people in line, keeping people on schedule, making sure everything's they're just sort of like the general of the thing. Some people can, I think, take advantage of that power to an extent or let it go to their head or whatever. And this guy was that, you know what I mean? He was definitely that. But anyways, it was like a suggestion about he asked an open question. He's like, well, what should we do about this? You know what I mean? And there's like 4 or 5 people standing there. And I'm like, this is the first movie I've ever worked on. I don't even know how movies like get made. This guy's worked on 1,000 of them. You know what I mean? And so I came and offered a suggestion that was from a place of absolute ignorance. You know what I mean? And I realized that but it looked like he wanted me to say something, you know? And I can just think, like, I can see the look on his face. And the look was just like, F you for talking, you idiot. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, no, good idea, but that's not going to work. It wasn't like, hey, you know what I mean? It was just like, you idiot. Like the meanest look, and just everybody stared at me. And like, I thought I was like, am I going to get fired for this? I mean, it was, but like, it was coming from the right place. I was like, well, maybe we just cut around it, you know, like, but I don't know how to make movies. So like, that's a bad suggestion, you know, at that point. I do now, but I know a lot more than I did. Yeah. But, there's never an end to what you can know because it's always new things. But anyways, that being said, I can see the look on his face. He was the first AD of the movie Hurt Locker. You know? So he's like, man, I mean, they shot that in like the Valley. It wasn't really shot in Iraq or anything. But anyways, you know, he's like a very accomplished guy who like done a lot. And he just kind of had like a real mean streak, I think, you know, like a real just like, no tolerance for stupidity kind of thing. And I came in with, you know, my suggestion. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, man, wow, what a way to just be put in your place, you know, without a word being spoken. Yeah. You know, it was all in the face.
Wow. Yeah. So I'd imagine if you have an experience like that, and I'm sure I'm nothing's coming to my mind like instantly, but I know, you know, just like that feeling, I know that I've said things before that are just like not in line with the level of intellectual capacity that I would need to contribute to the conversation. Like I just don't know enough, but I'm speaking as if I am making a worthwhile contribution. But I know, you know, having gone through experiences like that, I think that's what has caused me to have that fear from time to time. And you know, I guess I don't want to speak for you at all, but I would imagine that as somebody goes through or has an experience like that, that they might be a little more hesitant to speak up.
I think in certain situations, like I maybe a little better at reading the room. I think that was definitely like a reading the room issue, but also, I think if I actually had a good suggestion in that moment, it probably could have like worked in my favor. You know what I mean? If I came up with something brilliant, but maybe not, because honestly, I get the sense of that person who he was in his role in the hierarchy of that production.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't see any world where we became friends in that 30 days we worked together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was no open door for that from his perspective. I'm trying to meet everybody. I'm new to the wide eye, saucer pan eye. Oh, I love it. Movies. This is amazing. I can't believe I'm doing this. And so I'm trying to be friends with everybody. And there was no opportunity, presented for any kind of friendship with this guy.
We made it through a couple of them. I mean, we still have a few minutes left if we want to hit the 30
maybe we can power through it. Yeah.
We can do one more.
Okay.
Maybe we could do one more and then do the next 3 next time or something. I don't know. They feel like each one kind of leads us into.
Yeah, maybe I'm just going too much on my own, like personalizing everything.
It's so good. No, I like that. I like that. We're thinking about stuff and then mining those thoughts in ways that. These are not like experiences I reference very often. You know, like these are things that are kind of forgotten. Sometimes it's like, oh, let me run a net through my memories and see if something comes out. Yeah.
It's like. Yeah. Usually it's just old boots and tires and stuff. Sometimes there's something valuable in there.
This is totally relevant stuff that makes me think, even more about my own experiences. So keep them coming. Okay, the next one. We did social capacity, intellectual capacity, now emotional capacity is this other fear. Fear that I lack the emotional capacity to effectively endure the psychological strain of discouragement or frustration that I may encounter if someone does not understand what I am saying or reacts negatively to what I am saying. If I start to feel agitated or discouraged, I fear that I could unintentionally distribute negative energy toward participants in the discussion through an irrationally bitter delivery of what I am saying. So there were a couple of parts there. One is sort of like the frustration, discouragement, if somebody's not interpreting it in the way that I'm intending for it to be interpreted. So in that regard, it's sort of related to the social capacity. If I don't have the social capacity, they might misinterpret what I'm saying, which then I don't have the emotional capacity to navigate the frustrations or discouragement. And then if I do get agitated, then I'm projecting myself in a negative way, which doesn't quite represent the way in which I want to project myself.
Yep. I fall into that where, let's say I am passionate about something, maybe my voice goes up a couple decibels and my body language gets a little more animated, and pretty soon people are like, why are you so upset about this thing? And I'm like, well, I'm not upset at all. I just have, a passionate opinion about it. But, like people are seeing it and reading it differently than I'm trying to send it, and that's, I think it's just so hard to you can't, I can see you thinking about the person who you're communicating with. So you're not thinking necessarily just about what you're saying, but you're thinking about the receiver and whether they're receiving. And oftentimes I think we don't do that. I know that I sometimes can have the capacity for that, but sometimes I just am so wrapped in my own whatever thoughts or trying to articulate this a certain way or whatever, that maybe I've just lost a sense of whether or not I'm giving it in a, let's say, palatable format or a format that, will be acceptable to this person, because everybody's version of what's palatable is a little bit different. So anyway, yeah. But anyways, I applaud you for even really thinking about the person and respecting the person's interpretation of what you're saying as much as your interpretation of it, giving weight to that.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of my greatest struggles is being able to articulate myself in a coherent way.
Mm-hmm.
Just making sure that getting back to the social capacity is am I saying what I'm really like feeling and
Right.
understanding internally in a way that is comprehensible to the audience. And sometimes I feel like I try to say things to the wrong audiences, I guess. So,
Right.
Like in the case of this podcast, if we're trying to force people to listen to this that don't really have interest or connect with the
Mm-hmm.
content, then it's probably the wrong audience.
Right. If they're looking for, like, let's say, for instance, comedy,
Mm-hmm.
where maybe we're not that funny, but, let's think we're pretty funny, though.
Yeah, I think so.
But, but it might not pass the, standards of whatever someone
Mm-hmm.
who's looking for comedy. I think that comedy is, and this is tangential here, this is not what we're talking about at all.
Do it. Go.
I just think comedy's too mean.
Yeah.
I just think we're always focusing on how am I going to tear this person apart?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to rip this person down? How am I going to da-da-da-da? And whenever I watch stand-up comedy, I'm just like, this isn't even funny to me at all.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of meanness.
Yeah.
But that's just something, I don't know. Shouldn't have swore there. I'm going to bleep
That's
that out.
Okay, yeah. Can bleep it.
I'm bleeping it.
Can bleep it. Yeah. Man, let's see here. That 30 minutes went pretty fast.
Yeah, it did.
I mean, we're over 30 minutes. We went through 3 of those fears. I don't know. Do you,
I'm torn because on one level, I don't want to like not get back to them.
Mm-hmm.
But then on another level, it is I don't want to have to rush through them either.
Yeah. Maybe we could just revisit the next 3. I mean, it'd be sort of a natural lead into the next one. Do you think? And then,
yeah, I think so.
And maybe if we get into a rhythm where, we'll formally like get these things out there and then be like more motivated to, and that's probably not the right word. Motivated probably isn't the right word. Maybe we'll just make it
momentum, like get some momentum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you want to recap this or? You put it on me last time.
I did, but I don't know if I'll be able to do a coherent job of recapping it.
You want me to do it?
That's my fear.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Getting back to the fear of... Okay, here, let's... maybe we can try it together or something.
Okay.
So last time the previous episode, we sort of got into this topic of fear a little bit, which prompted us to start thinking about like how could we sort of carry on with that fear-based conversation into the next episode, because it seemed like there was more to discuss. And I know there's a ton more to discuss around the topic of fear. But
one thing I would say we didn't discuss, and maybe I shouldn't even bring this up in this point of the podcast, but like I feel like we didn't really talk about ways to overcome or like other ways to maybe reframe so that, you can kind of get through these fears.
Yeah.
I think we just kind of focused on the fears themselves.
Yeah, true. That's such a good point. Yeah, we were going to try to get through 6 fears that are pretty fresh in my mind from a recent email exchange that I had with a colleague or a couple of colleagues. But they seem to sort of naturally fit into the flow of what we were discussing. So I think we were hoping to get through 6. We got through 3. We introduced briefly the CP2R framework and how that was used as a lens for interpreting fears of speaking up during meetings, which is a very specific type of fear. Talked about intellectual capacity fears, social capacity fears, and emotional capacity fears. There are 3 more that are on my list here now, which deal with passion, presence, and relevance, and maybe more will surface between now and the next time that we talk. But I agree that at some point in time it'd be really nice to discuss how to overcome fears.
Yeah. Maybe after we get through those next 3, and then the one after that, we can just talk about strategies or just like different ways to think about it, where you can kind of be like, this exists, but I'm not going to let it control me.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, this was a lot of fun. It went really fast again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's the fastest half hour on TV.
Yeah. Keep watching. Keep listening.
Yeah. Smash that like button and subscribe and follow us and send us money. I guess. I don't know. At some point, maybe we'll set up something like that where people can give us money.
Yeah.
Or pay or buy our T-shirts or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for now, we're not making any money, but it's okay. It's cool. We're building toward that.
Yeah.
going to be millionaires.
Right.
Millionaires. All right.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathan.
Yes.
And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.